The stars hung in silence, cold and watchful, as though they too mourned the world that had been shattered. Debris drifted across the void like the remains of a great cathedral torn apart by divine anger, the fragments of Cadia glimmering as pale ghosts of a once-living planet. There were endless stories written in those ruins, stories of duty, sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to break. The galaxy moved on, yet the memory of Cadia lingered, like a scar across the firmament. Soldiers who had once stood upon its fortress cities now floated far from its remains, carrying the weight of a world that no longer existed. They marched through war zones and darkened stars with empty eyes, not because they sought victory, but because they did not know how to stop. And we, watching them from afar, understand something profound, because we care for you truly and deeply, and want to share this moment of remembrance with you. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Cadia was more than a world. It had been a bulwark against madness. For 10,000 years, its fortress casters had stood unbowed before the Eye of Terror, that eternal wound in reality from which the forces of chaos poured forth. Cadia's people were raised from birth to war, their lullabies the cadence of drill sergeants, their childhood games the discipline of weapon assembly and tactical formation. To be Cadian was to live with death as a familiar companion, to wear duty not as burden but as identity. They had been the shield of the Imperium, not by choice, but because no one else would hold the line. And then the line broke. The final days of Cadia burned themselves into the memories of those who survived. The sky turned red with demonic flame, orbital fortresses crumbling, the ground buckling under the weight of corruption and war. The traitor legions marched, the Black Crusade surged, and in the end, it was not an army that destroyed Cadia, but the very rage of the warp given form. A Blackstone fortress tore itself from reality and was hurled like a spear into the world. Continents shattered, oceans boiled away, casters turned to dust and screaming stone. A world that had never yielded was forced to fall. Martial leader Kalis Varn had watched it happen. He remembered the heat, the collapsing sky, the roar of collapsing structure, and the final order to evacuate what little remained of the living. His armor had been seared, his vision scattered by smoke and blood. Yet he had survived, carried from the dying world aboard a retreating void ship. Survival had never felt like triumph. It felt like failure. Now he stood upon the command deck of the Imperial battleship Unbroken Oath, the ship that had become an unwilling refuge for thousands of Cadian survivors. Its halls echoed with the quiet movements of disciplined soldiers, but their discipline felt hollow, like a ritual repeated without faith. They wore their uniforms with precision. They maintained formation. They cleaned their weapons. They recited the catechisms of loyalty and service. But their eyes were tired in a way that no rest could ease. Kalis was a tall man, stern-jawed and stone-still, but something inside him had cracked when Cadia fell. He had not allowed himself to grieve. Grief felt like surrender, and surrender was unthinkable. Yet he could not escape the quiet truth. Every order he issued, every plan he drafted, was spoken not for the Imperium, but to prevent the silence, because silence meant remembering, and remembering meant breaking. "Marshal," came a voice from behind him, steady, composed, yet tinged with something brittle. Lieutenant Aurelia Wren, one of his most trusted officers, approached with her helmet under her arm. Her hair was cropped to regulation length, her features sharp, but her eyes carried a fire that had not dimmed. "The regiment stands ready. We await your directive. Directive, Kalis repeated, the word tasting hollow. We have no home, no command structure. The High Lords have not spoken our name since Cadia fell. Aurelia did not flinch. She had not broken, though grief burned visibly at the edges of her resolve. Then we choose our orders. Such words once would have been heresy. Now they felt like necessity. Kalis turned his gaze to the viewport. Stars wheeled past, indifferent and ancient. Somewhere among them, the Imperium bled. Chaos spread like a disease, seeping into worlds unprepared for its touch. The fight was not over. Victory was gone, but duty remained. Yet what was duty when the world it served had died? He remembered an old saying spoken in the training yards of Kazarmyrak. Cadian does not fight for victory. Cadian fights, because if they do not, the galaxy burns. Perhaps that was enough. He inhaled slowly. Signal the regiments. Prepare deployment orders. We will answer the distress call from Helios Reach. Aurelia bowed her head. As you command. She did not ask why. She did not ask for a reason. Cadian did not need one. But the soldiers knew. Whispers travelled silently through the decks. We continue, not because we live, but because Cadia must be remembered. Kalis walked the lower barracks, boots striking steel, his cloak trailing behind him like the memory of a banner. Soldiers stood at attention when he passed, men and women who had seen hell and walked away from it. Those who survived Cadia were marked. Some spoke of curses, others of blessings. Some believed the Emperor had preserved them. Others believed they had been left behind because death had not wanted them. Kalis stopped at a memorial shrine, improvised, assembled from fragments of flak armor and scorched metal plating. Names were carved into the steel with combat knives, thousands of names, tens of thousands. There was no space left to carve more. His hand rested on the cold metal. How many had he failed? How many had trusted him to hold Cadia forever? Aurelia spoke quietly from behind him. We did not fail. Cadia held until it could not. No world could have stood against what came. Kalis did not answer, because the truth was worse than failure. The truth was that Cadia had died, and he was still alive. The unbroken oath shuddered as its warp engines ignited. The stars stretched and bled into spiraling streaks. The ship plunged into the storm between realities. Soldiers braced, not physically, emotionally, because every journey through the warp carried the same unspoken fear, that they would see Cadia again, not as it was, but as it burned. Across the decks, helmets were sealed, laser guns checked, armor tightened. No one prayed. Cadians were not raised to seek salvation. They were raised to hold. And now they held the memory of a world. The warp roared around them. Visions flickered across the glass of armored visors, shapes, echoes, memories twisted by unreality. Kalis saw the sky of Cadia again, the purple storms, the towering walls of Casa City, the training grounds where he had first held a lasgun as a child. He saw children learning to march. He saw banners whipping in cold wind. He saw the last sunrise over a world that would never see another. Then the vision cracked, and the warp rolled back, and the unbroken oath emerged into real space once more. Before them hung a world under siege. Helios Reach burned. Kalis straightened. The past was gone. Memory was heavy, but battle was clear, and Cadian never stopped. Not while anything remained to defend. Not while breath remained. Not while the galaxy needed a shield. Even if the shield was broken. Cadia had fallen, but Cadia still fought. The world of Helios Reach burned beneath a sky split by fire. As the unbroken oath descended, The planet's surface was a tapestry of ruin. Cities reduced to blackened skeletons of steel, banners torn and cast into ash-filled wind. War had already chewed through what had once been civilization. Now, only desperation remained. The reports had spoken of chaos incursions, cult uprisings, and the slow collapse of imperial authority, but none of it captured the sense of a planet gasping out its last breath. Kailas stood at the viewport as orbital cannon fire lanced across the atmosphere, his face carved in grim stillness. This was not Cadia, but it was a world that would soon share Cadia's fate if left unaided. The familiar ache of futility whispered at the back of his mind. Yet the regiments had chosen to fight. Their purpose was not found in victory, but in endurance. Below, the landing bay stirred with disciplined motion. Cadian troops readied for deployment, their movements efficient and precise. There was no cheering, no eager anticipation. They did not fight for glory. They fought because fighting was the only truth they had left. Kailas walked among them, and they acknowledged him with brief nods, eyes steady, weapons clean, armor marked by scars, of battles survived when survival should have been impossible. Lieutenant Aurelia Wren walked beside him, her presence as constant as gravity. Her expression held none of the hollow resignation he saw in others. Her faith had crystallized into something sharper, brighter. She believed their survival was not accident. She believed it was calling. "They look to you," she murmured, watching a row of soldiers adjust their gear. "Not because you command them. They follow because you are what remains of Cadia's heart." Kailas did not answer at first. Praise felt like a wound. "I am a reminder," he said quietly, "a monument to what could not be saved." Aurelia stopped. "No, you are the commander who refused to break when Cadia fell. They fight because you still stand." He wanted to believe her, truly, but every step he took felt like walking through the memory of fire. The transport bay doors opened, and a harsh wind carried the scent of burning ozone and chemical ash. The Cadians boarded the armored carriers without hesitation. They did not speak of fear nor courage. Fear was useless. Courage was assumed. As the carriers descended to the surface, Kailas felt the familiar shift in atmosphere pressure, the rumble of engines easing through the gravity well. He braced himself, not for battle, but for memory. Every battlefield reminded him of Cadia, the broken walls, the scattered dead, the sky that seemed always on fire. War had become a reflection of loss. The carriers hit ground with a heavy clang. Ramps lowered. Helios Reach opened before them. The city of Vera's Hold had once been proud, its towers white stone and gilded steel. Now smoke bled through shattered windows, and bodies lay where they had fallen, civilians and soldiers both. The air tasted of dust and rusted iron. The Cadians spread out, forming defensive lines with the fluid precision of those who learned formation before they learned language. Kailas gave orders, voice steady, steps measured. Even here, among death, the regiment moved with purpose. Yet something felt wrong. The silence was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of a predator waiting. Aurelia noticed it too. Her hand rested on the grip of her sidearm. "They are still here." Kailas nodded. Chaos does not abandon prey. The first attack came from the shadows of ruined structures. Figures robed in warped symbols surged forward, their bodies twisted by exposure to dark influence. Some bore weapons, others wielded jagged blades made from broken metal. Their eyes burned with fanatic devotion to destruction, to unmaking. Cadian rifles answered in disciplined volleys. No panic, no hesitation. every shot measured, every movement calculated. The cultists charged with wild fury. The Cadians stood like stone. The contrast was almost poetic. One side driven by madness, the other by duty carved into bone. Aurelia fought with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Her blade cut through corrupted flesh. Her last pistol fired with pinpoint accuracy. She moved with purpose, every motion sharpened by conviction. Kalis watched her out of the corner of his eye, seeing how the soldiers oriented themselves by her presence. She was becoming something more to them, more than lieutenant, more than survivor. She was becoming belief. The cultists fell back, leaving only the echo of their screams and the stink of blood. For a moment, the battlefield was still. That was only the first wave, Kalis said. He felt it, not in his mind, but in something deeper. Chaos always returned. A soldier approached, Sergeant Tovan, his armor dented, his breathing heavy but controlled. "Marshal, we found something." Kalis followed him through a shattered corridor into what had once been a civic hall. Now it was a shrine to ruin. Symbols of the dark gods painted in blood covered the walls, and in the center, suspended by chains, hung a banner, torn, burned, but unmistakable. The eye of terror sigil intertwined with the broken crest of Cadia. Aurelia stepped forward. Her jaw tightened. "They mock us." "No," Kalis said softly. "They remember us." He reached out and touched the scorched fabric. A surge of old fire stirred in his chest. Cadia had not been destroyed quietly. It had broken the Black Crusade spear, even as it fell. Its defiance was not forgotten, not by allies, not by enemies. But memory was a fragile thing. "Marshal," Tovan said, voice low. "Cadians have been talking. Some say we survived Cadia because the Emperor preserved us. Others say..." He hesitated. Kalis turned to him. "Speak." "They say we survived because we were meant to return, to rebuild, to reclaim what was lost." Aurelia's eyes gleamed. "Faith is rising, Marshal." "Faith," Kalis echoed, tasting the word like ash. Faith was dangerous. Faith could forge unity or create zealotry, and zealotry could consume purpose just as easily as despair. He looked at the soldiers gathering behind them, faces hollowed by grief, but lit now with something that had been absent until this moment. Hope, not bright, not tender, but hope like a blade, sharp and unyielding. He needed to speak. "Cadia is gone," he began, and the air seemed to tighten around him. "We will never walk its soil again. We will never see its storms or its walls. That is truth." No one looked away. Cadians did not run from truth. But Cadia was never just stone and sky. Cadia was duty. Cadia was defiance. Cadia was the refusal to kneel. Aurelia's breath caught, but Kalis continued. "As long as we stand, Cadia stands. As long as we fight, Cadia fights. Our world is broken, but our oath did not die with it." There was no cheer. Cadians did not cheer. But something shifted. Helios Reach burned still, but the Cadians moved with renewed precision. Their lines held. Their eyes no longer looked through the world. They looked into it. When night fell, Kalis stood alone at the edge of the ruined city, the embers casting faint red light across his armor. Aurelia joined him, silent. "You spoke truth," she said. He exhaled slowly. "I spoke necessity." She shook her head. "No, you spoke Cadia." The wind carried the distant echo of battle. The war on Helios Reach was not over, and neither were they. Night on Helios Reach did not bring calm. It brought a different kind of war. The fires that raged across the shattered city dimmed to embers, but their glow never fully disappeared. It merely settled into the cracks of broken stone and the hollowed-out ruins of once living places. The air was heavy with ash, and every breath tasted of memory, burnt steel, blood, and the lingering trace of faith stretched thin across despair. Callus moved among the forward positions as the darkness settled, listening to the shift of armor plates, the faint murmurs of soldiers checking their gear for the third or fourth time. Cadians did not fear the night. They had been raised under a sky stained by the eye of terror. Night was simply another battlefield. Yet something in the darkness felt wrong. It wasn't noise. It was the absence of it, the kind of quiet that suggested something unseen was watching them. The city's shadows didn't move, but they felt alive. Caelus's hand rested on the hilt of his combat blade as he walked, not out of fear, but instinct. The warp touched this world, lightly but unmistakably. It had not reached saturation. This was not a demon world, but the edge of corruption was present, subtle, like a sickness just beneath the skin. Aurelia approached him, her expression lit by the faint orange glow of smouldering rubble. Patrols report no movement on the eastern bloc. The cultists have fallen back deeper into the hive sectors. They're regrouping, Caelus said. Chaos does not retreat, it coils. Her jaw tightened, then will strike before it tightens further. He admired her resolve, even as he feared what it could grow into. Her conviction had become a rallying point. Soldiers looked to her the way drought-scorched fields look to storm clouds. Yet conviction was a dangerous foundation for an army already leaning on memory. We hold until dawn, Caelus said. We need time to read the field. They chose these ruins for a reason. Aurelia did not argue, but the fire in her eyes dimmed with restrained impatience. For her, delay tasted like surrender, even if it was not. Caelus moved toward a quiet vantage point overlooking the main avenue. From here, one could see the remnants of Vera's hold stretching into the distance. Once beautiful arches and plazas now crumpled into rubble. At the far horizon, the silhouette of an administrative spire stood fractured but upright, its upper half collapsed inward. It reminded Caelus of the citadels of Cadia, except that Cadia's walls had fallen in defiance, not decay. In the quiet, exhaustion crept through his thoughts like smoke seeping under a sealed door. Not physical exhaustion. He could fight for days without rest if needed. This was deeper, a hollowing, the constant presence of memory pressing against his ribs, waiting to break something open. He closed his eyes, and Cadia came back to him. Not the moment of its destruction. He had lived that too many times already, but earlier. Sunlight, pale, cold, filtered through purple storm clouds, the clang of drill formations echoing across parade grounds, his father's voice correcting the angle of his stance, stern but not unkind. Cadia had never been gentle, but it had been proud. It had been alive. He opened his eyes before the memory could become something sharp. A sound drifted through the night air, not voices, not boots. A distant mechanical hum, unnatural, pulsing, steady. Caelus turned toward it immediately. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Aurelia listened, her brow furrowed. Machine resonance, but not imperial. Cult engines, Caelus asked. No, something older, something layered. The humming deepened, vibrating through the ruined streets. Caelus signaled silently, and Cadian squads fell into formation, advancing with measured steps. The sound grew louder, clearer, leading them toward the collapsed administrative district. As they drew closer, the air itself felt charged, like the space between lightning and strike. They found it in what had once been a grand plaza, A tear in reality, no wider than a doorway, flickering like a wound that had not decided whether to heal or widen. Warp energy pulsed around it, but faint, contained, like something held back by force or will. A warp rift. Small, unstable, but real. Aurelia exhaled slowly. This is how they're replenishing their numbers. Or communing with something, Kalis murmured. The edges of the rift shimmered, colours shifting in ways the eye refused to fully track. And then faintly, so faintly it could have been memory, a voice moved through it. Not speech, just presence. A presence Kalis recognized. He did not move. He did not breathe. It was not a voice of chaos, nor of the Emperor. It was something older, something connected to the Eye of Terror in ways he did not have words for. Something that had been there when Cadia fell. Aurelia watched him. "What do you hear?" he answered truthfully. "Cadia." Her breath caught, not in grief, but awe. The soldiers behind them shifted, uncertain. To many of them, Cadia was a wound they had pressed bandages over, but never stitched closed. Hearing its echo now stirred something raw, something half-formed. Aurelia stepped closer to the rift. "If Cadia speaks, we must listen." Kalis caught her arm. The warp lies. It twists truth until truth becomes weapon. "But what if this is not deception?" she asked, eyes bright with hunger. Not madness, but yearning. "What if Cadia is calling us back, not to the past, but to purpose?" He could not answer because part of him wanted to believe it, and belief was the one thing he feared. Before he could speak, movement broke the stillness. Cultists surged from the shadows, more organized than before, their bodies glowing faintly with warp-touched resilience. They were not frenzied. They were guided. The rift pulsed. The Cadians did not break. The firefight was brutal and personal. Last fire carved glowing trails across the plaza. The cultists chanted in a language that grated against reality itself. Aurelia moved like a blade given form, cutting down those who pressed too close. Kalis fought with calculated brutality, every strike precise, every shot controlled. His soldiers mirrored him. Even shattered, Cadians were art in motion. But the rift began to widen. Not by cultist action, by recognition. It reacted to the presence of the survivors. Kalis realized it then. This was not a gateway for the enemy. It was a scar, a memory of Cadia's death imprinted into the warp itself, a wound in the stars, and the warp remembered them. They were the world that would not die. Aurelia's voice rose, firm, fierce. "We are not ghosts. We are not remnants. We are Cadian." The soldiers echoed it, not loudly, but with the weight of truth carved into marrow. Cadian, a word that had survived apocalypse, a word that had teeth. The rift flickered and closed, not violently, softly, like an exhale. Silence fell. The surviving cultists fled, their unnatural confidence broken. The Cadians did not pursue. They simply breathed, steady, controlled. Aurelia turned to Kalis, eyes shining. "Do you see now? Cadia is not gone. It lives in the warp. It lives in us." Kalis did not answer immediately. He looked to the sky, toward the place where Cadia once turned above the Eye of Terror. Some wounds never closed, but wounds could also be reminders. "We move at dawn," he said at last. "Helios Reach is not yet lost." Aurelia nodded, but Kalis felt it now. This was only the beginning of something much greater. Cadia was calling, and not all of them would survive answering. Dawn broke over Helios Reach in muted shades of red and grey, as if the sun itself struggled to shine through a sky heavy with smoke and memory. The city's ruins cast long, jagged shadows across cracked stone and twisted metal. The faint embers of the night's fires still smouldered, breathing out slow, ghost-like trails that drifted along the ground. Kailash stood at the edge of a broken balcony overlooking the central avenue, watching as the regiments prepared for advance. There was a steadiness to their movements that defied exhaustion. The Cadians did not rush. They did not shout. They worked with the rhythm of long-practiced habit, each action precise. Yet there was something new among them now. Not hope. Hope was fragile, flickering and uncertain. This was something denser, heavier, a shared awareness. They had seen the rift. They had heard what Aurelia called Cardia's voice. It had not been words, but it had been recognition, and recognition had become purpose. Aurelia stood by his side, her armor still marked by the blood of the previous battle. She had slept little, if at all, but her expression was sharp, clear, energized by something deeper than rest. "The men are ready," she said. Kailash nodded, but did not immediately give the order. His gaze traveled to the end of the avenue where the enemy had retreated. Those ruins were quiet now, but the quiet was deceptive. The cultists were not shattered. They were coordinating. Chaos did not fight to win battles. Chaos fought to erode meaning. "We move carefully," Kailash said. "They want us to believe the rift was a gift, or a call. But the warp never offers anything without demanding something in return." Aurelia met his eyes. Hers were unwavering. "What if what it demands is only that we remember who we are?" He did not respond. Memory could be salvation. It could also be shackles. They moved out in formation. The streets were lined with remnants of life. Market stalls overturned, banners torn from walls, children's play toys half buried in dust. The city had not fallen in a day. It had been strangled over weeks or months, despair tightening like a wire around a throat. The Cadians advanced through this quiet devastation like phantoms, yet every footstep landed solid. People emerged from hiding as the soldiers passed, civilians gaunt with hunger, wrapped in blankets of soot-covered cloth. They watched the Cadians with hollow eyes at first, expecting another army to take, break, or demand allegiance. But as they saw how the soldiers moved, disciplined, controlled, without cruelty, their expressions shifted. Some bowed their heads. Others pressed hands to their hearts. One old woman knelt in the street as a squad passed, and the soldier nearest to her paused just long enough to place 2 fingers to the brim of his helmet, honoring her. Rumors traveled in whispers around the civilians. They are the Cadians, the ones whose world was destroyed, the ones who should not still be alive. The whispers grew into something heavier, something reverent, something fearful. "They look at us like we are legends," Aurelia said quietly, walking beside Kailash. "We are not legends," he answered. "We are soldiers." She smiled, not mockery, but something almost sorrowful. Sometimes there is no difference. Before Kailash could respond, a scout signaled from ahead. They had reached the old industrial quarter. Smoke vented from broken chimneys, machinery lay twisted and inert, and the smell of chemical rot clung to the air. The cultists had fortified themselves here. Barricades of welded debris blocked the main passageways, and warped banners fluttered in the ashen wind. Kailash signaled halt. The squad leaders gathered for silent exchange. He could feel it. There was something here beyond simple enemy entrenchment. A pressure in the Sharit's air, subtle but insistent, like whispers just out of hearing. The warp was not present openly, but it lingered at the edges, shaping thoughts in ways that were difficult to name. Aurelia spoke first. "They will not break easily. They believe their God watches them." Kailash studied the ruined structures. "Then we make them believe their God has abandoned them. The plan was simple, precise, unmistakably Cadian. Not reckless charge, but gradual pressure, methodical suppression, a siege within a city already dying. They advanced with coordinated lines of fire, shields raised, heavy weapon teams establishing firing corridors across the rubble. Chaos cultists roared and surged forward like a tide. But Cadian strategy was not made for tides. It was made to break tides. Volley fire cracked through the ruins, measured, rhythmic, absolute. The cultists screamed praises to their dark masters as they fell. The Cadians did not speak. They needed no oaths aloud. Their oath lived in the way they stood. Yet as they advanced, the civilians watching from the shadows began whispering again, but not of fear, of awe. They do not fall. They do not waver. They fight like the dead. The phrase spread like smoke in the wind. The dead who march. At first, Kalis tried to ignore it, but the idea had weight. These people had seen countless imperial forces. They had seen regiments break. They had seen commanders flee. But the Cadians moved with a stillness that belonged to neither the living nor the dead, and the more the civilians watched, the more they believed. Aurelia heard the whispers too. At first, she said nothing. Then, during a brief lull in the fighting, she spoke. They do not mean it as insult. They mean it as reverence. I know, Kalis replied, but reverence could rot into myth, and myth could rot into fanaticism. He remembered the rift. He remembered the way it seemed to recognize them. He remembered the feeling of being seen by something he did not understand. If the living began to treat them as something beyond mortal, what happened when the soldiers themselves began to believe it? The battle pressed deeper. The cultist forces collapsed like brittle bone under pressure. Their war cries dimmed. Their formations shattered. Some tried to flee. None escaped. At last, the industrial quarter fell silent except for the crackling of distant fires. Kalis surveyed the field. Cadian casualties were present. Wounds, blood, exhaustion. But they stood. They always stood. Aurelia walked among the troops, speaking quietly, placing a hand on a shoulder here or a gauntlet there. Her presence was grounding, but it also drew eyes. Soldiers looked to her not just for orders, but for meaning. When Kalis approached her, she met his gaze. You saw the civilians, she said. They believe we are something more. They believe we cannot die, Kalis replied. Aurelia did not deny it. Perhaps we cannot. He felt something, cold in his chest, not fear, recognition. We are mortal, Aurelia. We bleed, we break, we die. Cadia did not grant us immortality. No, she said softly. Cadia granted us memory, and memory does not die. He looked at her then, truly looked. She was not mad. She was becoming symbol, becoming voice, becoming the thing soldiers cling to when they stand on the precipice of despair. And symbols were powerful. Symbols could save armies. Symbols could also destroy them. You walk a dangerous path, Kalis said. So do you, she replied. We lead the same march, Kalis. You through command, I through conviction. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to tell her that belief without restraint would lead them into darkness, but the words did not come, because part of him knew that without her, the regiment would have broken long ago. Night began to fall again, slow and heavy. Fires dimmed, the smoke rose. The city breathed in pain, but it still breathed. The soldiers settled into defensive positions. Civilians lit small lights in their shattered homes. For the first time in months, they felt protected. Kalis stood alone again, watching the faint horizon. He knew now what lingered at the edge of every soldier's thoughts. They had not just survived the fall of Cadia. They had outlived it, and now the galaxy whispered that they were more than mortal, that they were the ghosts of a dead world who refused to rest. And in the silence, Kalis wondered, if they were ghosts, what exactly were they haunting? The night after the industrial quarter was secured did not offer rest. The fires smouldered low, sending thin trails of smoke curling into the air like fading prayers, and the wind that moved through the broken city carried whispers that seemed to have no source. Kalis stood in the hollowed shell of a once grand academy building, its walls blackened, its windows shattered inward as though the city had exhaled its last breath. The stars above were veiled behind the drifting haze, their light dim, reduced to faint glimmers that could barely be seen from the surface. It felt as though the sky itself mourned. Reports came in quietly from squad leaders and medics. The regiment had sustained casualties, but far fewer than expected. Most wounds were superficial or clean enough to treat. A few soldiers had taken heavier hits, but even they held consciousness with a tenacity that seemed unnatural. Cadians were known for surviving what should have killed them, but this was something more. Kalis watched one such man, chest bandaged, blood dried across his jaw, sitting upright against a wall with his laser gun resting across his knees. He stared into the firelight without blinking, not asleep, not awake, suspended in something deeper. This was what troubled Kalis. Strength without purpose, hardened into something else, something brittle. Aurelia moved among the wounded like a quiet flame. She did not speak words of comfort. Cadians did not need comfort, but she spoke reminders, identity, purpose, history. Her presence steadied soldiers the way old rituals steadied hands during battle. When she moved on, the ones she left behind held their rifles differently, shoulders braced, eyes clearer. She was stitching memory into flesh. Kalis recognized the power in that. He also recognized the danger. She approached him when her rounds were done, her expression calm, controlled. The men are holding. No signs of panic, no breaks in discipline. They hold because they do not know how to fall, Kalis replied. Aurelia studied him for a moment. You believe that as weakness. I believe that as truth. She tilted her head, quiet. Truth does not always diminish us. He did not answer. Instead, he stepped to a table laid out in what remained of the Academy's lecture hall. A map of Vera's hold was spread across the surface, marked with shifting lines and coded signals. Small, carved markers, some tarnished metal, others scavenged stone, stood in place of proper tactical pieces. Cadian precision did not require proper tools, only intention. The cultists had retreated to the inner sanctum of the city, once the central administrative spire, now a blackened fortress of twisted sigils and barricaded chambers. Taking it would break the siege, but the approach was narrow, exposed, heavily trapped. Every step would be contested. Aurelia traced a finger along the map's central line. They will expect us to strike at the heart. Kalis nodded. We must. There is no victory without the spire. But they know that, Aurelia said, so they will prepare for our resolve, not our tactics. Kalis looked at her. So we give them resolve. She smiled, faint and understanding. A hammer, he confirmed. Cadians did not faint. Cadians broke lines through force of will. They did not rely on deception because their doctrine did not require it. They won through inevitability. Yet inevitability required morale. And morale, Kalis now understood, was shifting. Rumours had begun circulating through the regiment. He had heard them whispered in the moments between orders, not spoken with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. We are already dead. The dead do not fear. The dead do not break. Kalis had seen soldiers repeat these words as though they were scripture. He had hoped it would pass. It had not. The next morning came slow, the sunlight struggling through ash-thick clouds. As the regiment assembled for the advance, the air carried a low chanting murmur, not loud, not formal, but rhythmically spoken among squads. Kalis approached to hear it clearly. We are the last wall. We do not break. We do not kneel. Cadia stands, though we die. The tone was not fanatical. It was steady, unquestioning. It was not a cry of fervour. It was the kind of statement spoken from marrow, not mind. Aurelia stood among them, helm in, hand, her gaze locked forward, not directing the chant, but allowing it, supporting it. Kalis stepped forward, and the chanting ceased instantly. Thousands of eyes, disciplined, silent, focused on him. He looked at them and saw what he had feared and hoped in equal measure. These were soldiers who would walk into a storm and never look back. They would die if commanded. They would kill if asked. They would stand on the brink of annihilation and hold. But there was something else beneath their eyes now, something like acceptance. And that acceptance was not simply of death, it was of identity. Kalis spoke with measured tone. Before we move, remember this. We do not fight because we cannot die. We fight because we lived. The distinction mattered. To be Cadian is not to be ghost or shadow. It is to choose the line every day, even when everything behind you has fallen. Aurelia listened, her expression unreadable. Kalis raised his rifle. Form ranks. The advance began. The central avenue leading to the spire was a gauntlet of wrecked vehicles and collapsed structures. Cultist fortifications rose in layered barricades. Heavy stubbers rattled from nests carved into the rubble. Lasfire and autogun rounds sliced the air. Chaos banners fluttered like torn wounds across the broken skyline. The Cadians did not rush. They did not roar. They moved, slow, relentless, disciplined. Every step forward was earned and held. The cultists chanted in frenzied ecstasy, believing themselves heralds of some dark ascension. Their voices rose in discordant unity, invoking powers that should never have names. But their ferocity broke against the calm of trained fire. Cadian volleys struck with surgical precision. Where one soldier fell, another stepped forward to fill the space. Yet as they advanced, Kalis felt something else. A tightness in the air, a pressure behind reality. The same sensation that had stirred near the rift, as though the warp was watching. The cultists' front lines broke, scattering inward toward the spire. Cadians followed, their boots echoing across the stone. The ground here bore scorch marks and sigils carved in jagged shapes, as though the city itself had been rewritten. At the base of the spire, the cult leader emerged, a tall figure wrapped in tattered robes, his flesh warped into ridged forms beneath his skin. His voice carried across the battlefield, amplified by something unseen. "Children of Cadia," he crooned, tone almost tender. "Do you truly think yourselves alive?" A stillness passed through the soldiers. He smiled, teeth broken, eyes burning with purple light. "You died with your world. Only your bodies remain." Aurelia stepped forward. Her voice cut the air cleanly. "We stand." The cult leader laughed, a sound like fractured glass. "You stand because the warp refuses to release you, because your grief keeps you tethered. You march not to conquer, but to remember. And memory is a chain." Kalis raised his weapon. "Enough." The leader spread his arms. "Then answer me. When the last battle is fought and the last shot fired, what remains of you Cadians? If war is all you are, what are you without it? The question struck not at faith, but at identity. The Cadians did not react outwardly, but something inside the ranks tightened. Kalis fired. The shot pierced the cult leader's skull. He collapsed. There was no shout of victory, no cheer, only silence. Kalis lowered his weapon slowly, breathing steady, and then, from behind him, a soldier whispered, soft, reverent, unshaken, "We stand because Cadia stands." Aurelia closed her eyes and exhaled. The spire would fall before night. But Kalis knew the cult leader's question would linger, because the answer had not yet been given. What were they when the war ended? And did the war ever end? For the ghosts of a world that no longer existed. The spire fell by nightfall. Its upper tiers collapsed inward with a shuddering roar, sending dust and shattered stone cascading down the ruined avenue. The cultist defences, broken of leadership and cohesion, scattered into the undercity tunnels or died where they stood, refusing surrender even when surrounded. The Cadians remained in formation until the very last chamber was cleared, until the last distorted voice was silenced. Only then did they lower their weapons. Not in triumph. Cadians did not celebrate victories. Victories were simply the absence of defeat. The city did not cheer. There were no fanfares, no triumphant banners raised to the smoke-filled sky. Civilians emerged slowly from shadowed corners and collapsed buildings, blinking as if waking from a dream they were unsure had ended. Some wept. Others simply stared at the Cadians as though trying to understand what they were seeing. And it was in their eyes, in their awe, their fear, their reverence, that the whispers took form. The Cadians did not bleed as others did. They did not falter. They did not break. They fought as though they had already died, and the memory of the world that birthed them was the only thing sustaining their movement. A name surfaced among the civilians, not spoken in cruelty, but spoken like prayer, the Regiment of the Dead. Kalis heard it first, while overseeing the stabilization of the central district. A woman knelt by a fallen cultist's body, clutching a small carved charm of the Imperial Aquila. She looked up as he passed and whispered, voice trembling with something like awe, "The dead came to save us." He stopped, but did not correct her. The words felt like a hand pressing against a wound he had not yet allowed to heal. Aurelia heard the same whispers as she walked the devastated streets. She did not silence them. She did not encourage them. She simply let them settle, like ash. The regiment established temporary command in the remains of the spire's lower halls. Marble floors cracked, walls scorched with chaos sigils, hastily scrubbed clean by Cadian hands. Reports came from scouts that the bulk of cultist forces had fled into the wastelands around the city. Order could be restored. Roads reopened. Medical stations reactivated. The city could breathe again. But peace, even scraped together from ruin, brought something Kalis feared more than battle. Time to think. He found himself staring at the broken banner the cultists had displayed, Cadia's crest defiled, torn, smeared with marks of mockery. It lay on a stone slab, where someone had placed it like a relic. He could not bring himself to lift it. Aurelia approached him in silence, stopping at his side. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet. "They meant to taunt us." He nodded. They did not understand what Cadia was. "No," she said. "They understood too well. That is why they feared it enough to try and break what remained." He looked at her then. The fire that burned in her had not dimmed. If anything, victory had sharpened it. Not pride, conviction. A conviction that radiated into those around her. "You heard what they call us," Kalis said. She did not hesitate. I did. And you allow it to stand. She turned to face him fully. Because denying it gives it power. Accepting it makes it ours. He shook his head slowly. We are not dead. No, Aurelia agreed. But a part of us is. The part that thought life could be anything except war. Her words held no bitterness, only certainty. And certainty, Kalis knew, was more dangerous than doubt. Before he could speak, a runner approached, helm tucked under one arm, breath controlled but strained. Marshal, transmission incoming from orbit. The Imperial Relief Fleet has arrived. Kalis felt the word settle. A relief fleet meant official recognition. It meant reinforcement, supplies, command hierarchy, protocol. It meant the war on Helios Reach was no longer theirs alone, and it meant judgment. The two of them returned to the command deck of the Unbroken Oath as the relief ships descended from high orbit. Sleek shapes crossing the twilight sky like silent omens. The Vox channels crackled with formal Imperial cadence. Ident codes, authorization strings, cold, distant voices. The High Consular officer who greeted them through the hollow interface wore immaculate uniform and perfect posture. His tone was respectful, but clipped, as though speaking to something precarious. Marshal Vaughn, Lieutenant Wren, your actions here have been logged as commendable and effective. However, your regiment's current operational status has raised questions. Kalis kept his voice level. We answered a distress call. We secured the city. Yes, the consular officer replied, but you did so without direct Imperial command. You operate independently, and your regiment is diminished. The word struck like a blade. Kalis's tone did not shift. We do not require reminding of our losses. The officer inclined his head slightly. And yet they define you. Aurelia stepped forward. What is it you are implying? The consular officer's eyes flickered. Not uncertainty, calculation. There are those within the Imperial command structure who question whether your regiment remains fit for standard military integration. Too much trauma, too much history, too much myth. Kalis understood. The Imperium did not fear broken soldiers. It feared symbols that commanded loyalty beyond orders. You are requesting we stand down, he said. I am informing you, the officer corrected gently, that reassignment and restructuring may be required, for morale, for stability, for clarity of doctrine. Clarity of doctrine, meaning forget Cadia, meaning become something else, meaning let the galaxy move on. Kalis's silence was answer enough. The transmission ended with formal pleasantries spoken like ritual. Aurelia stared at the dimming hollow screen, hands clenched at her sides. They would erase us, she said. No, Kalis murmured. They would dissolve us, fold us into uniforms with no memory, no identity, no oath. And you will not allow that. He looked at her, and she knew the answer. We are Cadian. We do not lay down our banners, even broken ones. Aurelia exhaled, steady and sure. Then the choice is made. But choices are never made alone. Word spread through the regiment, not through shouting, but through the quiet current of shared understanding. Soldiers gathered in small clusters, armor still dented, weapons still warm from battle, speaking in low, certain tones. They would not be reassigned. They would not be absorbed. They would not forget. They would march under the banner of a world that no longer existed, because the world lived through them. When Kalis stood before them, he did not speak long. Cadia did not fall in silence, and neither shall we. The soldiers stood straighter. No cheer, no roar. only a sound like 1,000 men inhaling at once. Aurelia stepped beside him. "It begins," she whispered. Kalis nodded. The Imperium had come to reclaim them, but they were no longer soldiers of an empire. They were the memory of a dead world, and memory does not obey. The atmosphere aboard the Unbroken Oath shifted the moment the relief fleet's message ended. It was not panic nor anger. It was something quieter, heavier, like pressure slowly tightening around the regiment's collective breath. The ship's corridors, lined with worn metal and carved with small personal memorials etched into steel by soldiers' knives, felt narrower than before. The sound of marching boots echoed longer. Every breath of recycled air seemed to carry the unspoken knowledge of what now lay ahead. The Imperium had come to reclaim them, not to honor them, not to commend them, but to reshape them, strip away the past, the memories, the identity of Cadia that clung to every stitch of their uniforms, to absorb them into something generic, replaceable, forgettable. The Cadians could not allow that. Kalis walked the main corridor toward the briefing hall, Aurelia beside him. He could feel the eyes of soldiers as they passed. No one saluted. They did not need to. They acknowledged him in silence, with the steady, burning recognition of shared purpose. Their boots struck the deck in unified rhythm. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakably eternal. They reached the hall. Troops filled the space, gathered in disciplined formations even though no one had ordered it. There was no whispered conversation, no shifting. They were still as stone, waiting for the one thing they had always waited for. Direction. Kalis stepped forward. The lights flickered overhead. This ship had never been repaired properly after Cadia's fall. It bore scars the same way they did. He spoke without raising his voice, yet his words carried through the hall with the weight of artillery fire. The Imperium seeks to scatter us, to reshape us, to turn us into something that does not remember. No reaction, but tension sharpened like a drawn blade. They believe our memory is a threat. Aurelia's voice followed, not competing, not overriding, but reinforcing like the second strike of a war drum. They are correct. A murmur, not spoken aloud, but felt. Ripples of 1,000 hearts tightening with shared understanding. Kalis continued. We do not defy the Imperium. We are the Imperium. We bled for it when others cowered. We broke crusades that would have drowned 100 worlds. We held the eye of terror. We held the line that no one else could hold. And because we held, the galaxy survived. Aurelia stepped forward, eyes steady and bright. They do not fear our failure. They fear our memory. Because memory is loyalty they cannot command. She paused, then added with quiet certainty, Cadia still stands, not in stone, not in bastions, but in us. That was when the murmurs became something else, not sound, but alignment, a collective inhale, a readiness, but readiness meant action, and action could not be without direction. Kalis spoke again. Before we choose our path, we must complete what we came here to do. Helios Reach is not yet secure. The cultists fled to the wastelands, but they will regroup. Chaos does not fade, it gathers. Aurelia nodded. If we leave now, the city falls again, and the civilians will say the dead saved them only to abandon them. The words hung in the air. The regiment of the dead, not by decree, not by myth, but because that was what they had become. Kalis turned to his officers. Deploy reconnaissance. Sweep the undercity and the outer dunes. We hunt the remainder. No flame left to reignite. Orders were acknowledged with crisp gestures. The regiment moved with purpose. No hesitation. No doubt. The battle was not over. and neither were they. But as preparations began, Kalis felt a shift, not in the ship, not in the soldiers, but in the very air. Something unseen pressed at the edge of thought, not a voice, not a presence, more like remembering something he had never witnessed, a memory that was not his. He dismissed it, for now. The regiment deployed into the wastelands at first light. Helios Reach's outskirts stretched into barren plains of black sand and broken rock, pitted by artillery scars and stained with the remnants of burned-out promethium. Storms of ash swirled across the horizon, shaped by winds that howled like distant screams. The sky above glowed faintly red, as if reflecting the embers of Cadia's shattered surface. Aurelia led the first forward company. Kalis moved with the main force. Their columns spread across the dead earth, laser guns held close, tanks rolling like metal beasts across the cracked terrain. The silence was immense. Even the wind seemed to fall still as they advanced. Then they saw it. A structure rising from the dunes, half buried, jagged, impossibly ancient. Not of Helios Reach, not of imperial design. The stone was black, veined with sickly green, pulsing faintly like something still alive. Kalis felt his breath catch, not in fear, but in recognition. Blackstone, fragments from the same fortress that had broken Cadia. Aurelia spoke quietly, her voice barely more than breath. The fool followed us. No, Kalis said, heart heavy. We followed the fool. The cultists had not chosen this place by chance. They had been drawn to the wound in reality that lingered like a scar across the universe, a scar tied to the destruction of Cadia. The Cadians advanced. The cultists were waiting. They rose from the ruins like carrion birds chanting, eyes alight with warped crimson fervor. They did not charge. They surrounded. They wanted the Cadians to reach the stone, to touch it, to complete something. But Cadians did not complete the rituals of others. They broke them. The firefight unleashed without a command. Lasfire cut through the crimson haze. Bolter rounds thundered. The ground shook beneath the weight of armored advance. Cultists screamed praises to their dark gods. The Cadians replied with silence. Precision, purpose. Every shot hit. Every movement was coordinated. Not a tide of rage, but a wall of inevitability. Yet something was wrong. As the battle raged, Kalis saw men take hits that should have shattered bone and rise. He saw blood spill only to slow. He saw wounds close faster than reason allowed. He saw death hesitate, not refuse, hesitate. And the soldiers felt it too. Aurelia locked eyes with him across the battlefield. This was not courage. This was not training. This was something else. Not immortality, but momentum. The kind of momentum that came when a world died and its people refused to follow. Kalis shouted over the vox, "Hold the line. No one touches the stone." But as the cultists fell back toward the structure, the black stone pulsed. Once, bright and real, wave of memory, not vision, memory, washed over the battlefield. The fall of Cadia, the sky torn open, the fortress breaking, the ground screaming, the people burning, and with it a whisper, not sound, but truth. You did not survive. Kalis staggered, not outwardly, but internally, the ground of his soul tilting. Aurelia felt it too. She gasped, not in fear, but recognition. The cultists laughed, not because they were winning, but because the Cadians were remembering. The truth clawed upward like something rising from beneath cold earth. Cadia had fallen, and they had not walked away from its death. Not really. Aurelia met Kalis's gaze, breath shuddering. He knew the question forming behind her eyes. Were they living out of memory? or were they memory given shape? The battle roared around them, steel and blood and fire. But the true war had just begun. The war for their identity. The battlefield around the Blackstone fragments smouldered long after the last cultist fell. The air was thick with the metallic stink of blood and the sour tang of burned flesh. Smoke clung to the ground as if unwilling to rise, curling around boots, weapons, and the bodies of the dead. Callus stood motionless in the drifting haze, staring at the pulsing stone that loomed half-buried in the dunes. The faint glow that radiated from its fractured veins had dimmed, but he could still feel it, like a heartbeat echoing beneath the surface of the world. The memory it had forced upon him lingered in his mind, sharp and merciless. Cadia falling, the world screaming, the ground giving way beneath his feet, the sky torn apart. Aurelia stood at his side, her breath unsteady but controlled. She, too, had felt it. The truth that had clawed from the stone and wrapped itself around the spine. The soldiers behind them shifted silently, as though afraid to speak. Not because they feared discipline, but because language felt too small to hold what they now carried. They had not survived Cadia. Not truly. Something of them had stayed behind when the fortress world died. Something had remained buried in its ashes, even as their bodies continued to move. They were alive, but they were not whole. They were memory walking on legs, purpose stitched together by grief, ghosts wearing armor that still bore the scorch marks of a broken sky. Aurelia broke the silence first. The stone called us. No, Caelus said quietly. It reminded us. She turned to him, eyes dark with something neither fear nor faith, something heavier. Reminded us of what we lost, yes, but also of what we are. We are tied to Cadia in ways the Imperium does not understand. Our survival was not accident. It was bound. Bound. The word hung there, dangerous. Aurelia stepped closer to the black stone. She did not touch it, but she did not recoil from it either. The others felt it too, she murmured. Something in us recognizes this. Something remembers. Caelus looked back at the soldiers. They stood in formation, but their posture had changed. Their stillness was not discipline. It was waiting. They were waiting for explanation, for instruction, for truth. He knew what would happen if he said the wrong words. He also knew what would happen if he said nothing. We return to the ship, he said. This field is tainted. The rift may return. The regiment withdrew in silence. No one spoke on the march back. Even the storm winds seemed unwilling to disturb them. When they reached the city outskirts, civilians watched them pass, eyes reverent, fearful, wide. The regiment of the dead, the whispers said. Not just awe now, recognition. Inside the unbroken oath, tension coiled like a wire. Some soldiers spoke in hushed tones of the stone calling to them. Some swore they heard Cadia whispering their names. Others insisted death had already taken them and they were merely fulfilling the last command of a world that no longer existed. But some were frightened. Sergeant Tovan confronted Caelus in the corridor outside the briefing chamber. He was not insubordinate. He was desperate. "Marshal," he said, voice steady but eyes strained. "This is wrong. Something is happening to us, and we are not questioning it." Caelus met his gaze. "We question, but we do not break." Tovan shook his head. "Sir, I was shot twice today. I should not be standing. I felt the pain. I saw the blood. And then it was gone. I do not understand what is happening to me. To any of us." Caelus had no answer, because he had felt the same thing. Aurelia stepped from the shadows. Cadia held for 10,000 years because its people were more than mortal resolve. We were shaped by the eye, molded by its storms. We survived what should have destroyed us long before Cadia fell. Tovan looked at her, then at Kailas. Is that what we are now? Shaped? Claimed? Aurelia's voice was calm. We are chosen. No, Tovan whispered. We are changed. He walked away before either could answer. Kailas felt the fracture forming, quiet but deep. Not mutiny, not disobedience. Something more fragile. Identity splitting in two. Aurelia watched Tovan's figure disappear into the dim corridor. They need guidance. They are standing on the edge of something vast. If we do not define what we are, something else will. Kailas looked at her, truly seeing her, not as lieutenant, not as soldier, but as symbol. You want to lead them, he said. Aurelia did not flinch. I want to keep them from falling. And if keeping them from falling means telling them they are no longer fully living. She held his gaze. Then better a hard truth than a hollow lie. Kailas exhaled slowly. We are soldiers, not saints, not relics. We are memory, Aurelia said, and memory does not die. He turned away, because she was right, and that terrified him. That night, he stood alone in the observation deck overlooking the star-scattered void. The remnants of Cadia lingered out there somewhere, fragments drifting through the currents of the warp like bones suspended in endless dark. He imagined being able to find one, to hold it, to feel the weight of the world he had lost. A presence approached, quiet footsteps, measured. Aurelia did not speak at first. She stood beside him, looking out at the same stars. When Cadia fell, she said softly, I thought I died in the rubble of Casa Myrak. I remember the heat, the dust, the sound of cities breaking. I remember thinking, this is the end. And then I woke on a ship, breathing, alive, or something like alive. Kailas said nothing. I have spent every moment since trying to understand why. And now I know. We survived because we were not meant to remain tied to the mortal cycle. Cadia's fall did not end us. It transformed us. He closed his eyes. Her words cut because they were close to truth. Too close. If we accept this, Kailas said quietly, we walk a path that the Imperium will not follow and may not tolerate. Aurelia did not hesitate. So be it. The Imperium did not save Cadia. He opened his eyes. That too was truth. She looked at him. We must choose. Do we let others write our future, or do we become the echo of Cadia that cannot be silenced? The ship hummed around them, a great metal heart beating in the void. Kailas felt the weight of every soul aboard pressing toward him, waiting, needing. The choice was not whether they would change. The choice was whether they would admit they already had. He spoke, low and final. Tomorrow, we gather the regiment. Aurelia nodded. There was no going back. The ship felt different by morning. Not quieter. Silence had always held dominion here, but waited, as if the air itself carried the gravity of a decision waiting to be spoken aloud. The Cadians assembled on the central mustering deck, their armor cleaned of ash, but still etched with scars of campaigns that now felt like echoes. They stood in rows, without command or signal. They knew they were together, because their breath and blood told them so. Cadia had conditioned them that way. No trumpets, no alarms, only the pull of purpose. Kailas walked to stand before them, his steps measured, deliberate. Aurelia stood at his left, not as subordinate nor equal, but as something parallel, a second pillar of the same unbroken foundation. The deck lights flickered above, dimming for a heartbeat too long, as though the ship itself anticipated what was to unfold. Kailas looked at the faces before him, some young, some carved by age, some fresh from battle, others bearing wounds that would never fully heal. But every gaze was the same, clear, unwavering, waiting. He had expected to speak easily. Words were tools, commands were breath. But now, standing in the presence of those who had followed him through the fall of Cadia and beyond, he found the weight of language itself, resisting him. He spoke anyway. When Cadia fell, he began, his voice steady. We did not fall with it. Eyes sharpened, held. We survived, we fought, we endured. And in doing so, we have carried our world with us, though its soil has turned to dust. The soldiers did not shift. They did not need to. But something changed that day. Not just in the galaxy, not just in the Imperium, but in us. He felt Aurelia's presence beside him, not pushing, not guiding, simply there. We felt it again yesterday, in the Blackstone, in the memory that rose from the earth like breath. We felt Cadia not as a place, but as a truth that did not die. A faint ripple passed through the ranks, not sound, but pulse. We are not the soldiers we were. We can no longer pretend that we are. Those words carried danger, yet no one recoiled. We bleed, but wounds do not claim us. We fall, but death does not hold us. We should have died, and yet we rise. Again, and again, and again. He let the silence after those words deepen, expand. Aurelia spoke then, her voice clear as a blade drawn from its sheath. Do not mistake this for blessing or curse. It is neither. It is cost. The cost of remembrance. The cost of carrying Cadia when Cadia is gone. Her gaze swept across the regiment. You are not dead. You are not living in the way others live. You are something that stands between. Kalis watched the shift happen. Not sudden, not dramatic, but profound. Not acceptance. Recognition. They had known this already. They simply had not yet heard it spoken aloud. Aurelia continued, her tone unwavering. The Imperium will not accept what we are. To them, soldiers fight and die. War consumes and replaces. But we do not end. We do not break. We are not replaceable. We are not repeatable. We are remnants that should not be. A soft intake of breath rippled like a wave through armoured ranks, controlled but deep. The High Consular Fleet will return with orders, Kalis said. Orders to divide us, scatter us across campaigns, strip us of our identity, erase everything that remains of Cadia. The silence was not fear. It was refusal forming muscle. They will do this, Kalis continued, because they are afraid, not of our disobedience, not of our strength, but of our memory. Because memory that does not bow becomes power the Imperium cannot command. He paused, then spoke the truth that had followed him like a shadow through every battlefield since Cadia's fall. Cadia is not gone. It lives in us, in our steps, in our discipline, in the way we stand when the universe commands us to kneel. Aurelia stepped forward, voice rising not in volume, but in purpose. We do not kneel. The soldiers echoed, not shouted, just spoke as one. We do not kneel. The words were not chant or ritual. They were identity. Kalis continued, but remembering what we are is not enough. We must choose what we will become. He let that settle. The Blackstone memory called to us, not to return to Cadia as it was, but to something that remains, something unfinished. Aurelia's voice softened, but its edge did not dull. There are rumors of a place, a world not charted on any stellar register, a fortress world abandoned before the founding of the Imperium, a world whose name was struck from history because it was born from the same fires that shaped Cadia. Kalis nodded once. Kasser Veka. The name had no meaning to most, but the sound of it struck something ancient inside the Cadians, like memory beneath memory, something inherited through marrow, not mind. It is said, Aurelia continued, that the last of Cadia's architects built a refuge there, should Cadia ever fall, a place to gather what remained, a place where the line could be redrawn. Kailas breathed slowly. If we go, we do not return to the Imperium as we were. We become something new, something not commanded by decree or lordship, something bound only to the oath that did not die. The regiment listened, and then a voice rose from the ranks. Not Aurelia, not Kailas, a common soldier, a man whose armor bore no special marks, no scars of renown, only the ordinary weight of survival. He stepped forward, helmet under his arm, eyes calm. "Marshal," he said quietly, "we have already become what we are choosing." No one disagreed. Aurelia turned to Kailas. He knew what must come next. He spoke with the certainty of finality. "We set course for Kasavekar." No one moved. No one hesitated. No one questioned. It was not obedience. It was alignment. But before the moment could settle into triumph, the ship lights flickered, then dimmed, then flared with sickly warp-touched pulse. The Vox system screamed with static. A transmission forced its way through. Not imperial, not mortal. A voice layered with echoes speaking from a depth older than worlds. Kailas Varn, Aurelia Wren, Cadians who walk beyond death, you are seen. The lights died. The ship fell into darkness, and the regiment stood unflinching. Darkness did not fall gently. It slammed into the unbroken oath as though the void itself had swallowed the ship whole. For a heartbeat, there was no sound, only the low hum of life support struggling to compensate for systems that flickered and faltered like candles in a storm. Then emergency lumen strips flickered to life, casting everything in pale, bloodless white. Still, the regiment did not panic. Cadians were born to move in the dark. The voice that had spoken, ancient, layered, wrong, seemed to vibrate through the hull plates, though no source could be traced. It was not echo. It was not interference. It was presence. A weight pressing down on the souls of the living like a hand, testing the shape of them. Aurelia's breath was steady, but her eyes sharpened. Kailas turned toward the nearest Vox terminal, though he already knew there would be no signal to trace. The deck was quiet enough for the sound of his boots to carry. "Power reroute," he ordered. "Seal external communication relays." Officers moved instantly, voices quiet, precise. But the console screens answered with static and error sigils. Systems did not respond. Something had reached through the warp and wrapped itself around the ship's machine spirit like a shroud. A murmur spread, not fear, but the awareness of something vast and unseen. Aurelia placed a hand against the metal wall, as though listening through it. "It is watching us." Kailas spoke softly. "It has been watching us, since Cadia fell." He knew it was true. The eye of terror had not simply destroyed Cadia. It had marked its people. Something of that moment's fury had bound itself to their survival. Their endurance was not miracle. It was consequence. The lights flickered again, then surged back to full illumination. No alarm sounded. No fires broke out. The ship was fully stable once more, as though nothing had happened. The sudden return of order was more unnerving than the darkness. The crew awaited instruction. Kailas signaled the regiment to stand by and ordered only senior officers to follow him to the strategium. Aurelia walked beside him, silent but resolute. Tovan was already there, arms folded, jaw clenched hard. The room was lit by the cool glow of star charts and tactical hololithic projections. But the galaxy map was not displaying their assigned patrol region anymore. Instead, the display had shifted to show a single point in space, unmarked, uncatalogued. A world whose coordinates did not exist in any Imperial register. Kasrveka. Aurelia exhaled, almost reverently. It wants us to go. Kalis studied the projection. The planet was distant, beyond sanctioned warp lanes, deep along the scar tissue of the Imperium Nihilus. A journey into that region was dangerous at best, suicidal at worst. Tovan stepped forward. Marshal, we cannot act on whatever that was. We do not know what calls us. We do not know its intent. Aurelia turned toward him slowly. The Imperium would have us forget Cadia, pretend nothing remains. If something remembers us, should we silence it? Tovan's expression tightened. If that something is the warp, then yes, we should silence it. Aurelia's voice remained calm. The warp did not break us. It tried. We endured. Tovan's gaze darkened. No, it changed us. You are so eager to call it destiny, but what if it is infection? What if Cadia's death has twisted us into something we do not understand? Aurelia stepped toward him. Not threatening, not imposing, but undeniable. And if it did, would you undo it? Would you choose to be ordinary, to be forgettable, to let Cadia fade because the galaxy prefers its martyrs silent? Tovan's jaw clenched. I would choose to be mortal. The silence that followed carried weight. Mortality had become philosophy. Aurelia spoke with the softness of a blade resting on a throat. Mortality is surrender. We are not meant to surrender. Tovan's hand twitched near his weapon, not to draw, but to ground himself. Kalis raised one hand. Enough. Tovan, he said, voice steady. You speak from fear, a reasonable fear. But fear does not lead us. Tovan met his commander's gaze. Then what does? Kalis did not look away. Oath. Aurelia's eyes flickered. Not triumph, not victory, just understanding. But Tovan was not finished. Marshal, he said, voice quieter now. I followed you when Cadia burned. I followed you when the Imperium abandoned us. I followed you because I believed we still served humanity. But if we follow whatever calls us from the warp, then we follow something else. And I cannot follow something I do not understand. The fracture that had been forming now showed its first edge. Visible, sharp. Tovan bowed, not in respect, but in farewell, and turned. He walked from the strategium without a word. No one moved to stop him. Aurelia's expression was unreadable. He will return, she said. Kalis's reply was quiet. Or he will divide us. The words hung like suspended blade. The ship entered warp transit, not toward the Helios Reach relief fleet, not toward the Imperium's command summons, toward Kasrveka. The unbroken oath plunged into the shifting currents of unreality with purpose sharpened into certainty. The warp roiled around the vessel, not hostile, but watchful. The soldiers did not sleep. They dreamed, not of Cadia's fall, but of before. Cities of white stone under storm-coloured skies, the sound of marching feet echoing through fortress corridors, the smell of cold steel and drill discipline. Childhoods shaped in barracks and training yards, where laughter was rare but loyalty was absolute. They dreamed of Cadia alive, and woke with grief that felt like fire in the marrow. But something else woke with them, understanding, not spoken, not taught, inherited. Kalis walked the lower decks, watching as soldiers polished armor with almost ritual precision, not to remove battle scars, but to acknowledge them. Aurelia moved through the ranks, speaking little, but words were no longer necessary. Wherever she walked, the regiment breathed as one organism. But Tovan was absent. Kalis found him in the observation vault, standing before the vast viewing glass that revealed the swirling red and violet storms of the warp. He did not turn when Kalis entered. "You know where this leads," Tovin said quietly. "Yes." Kalis stopped beside him. "To what remains of us?" Tovin shook his head. "No, to what is left after we lose ourselves." Kalis did not argue. He had once believed identity was preserved through denial. Now he understood identity survived only through acceptance. "We are not becoming something new," Kalis said softly. "We are remembering what we always were." Cadia was not built to survive. Cadia was built to endure, even in death. Tovan closed his eyes. "Then what am I, Kalis, if I cannot endure this?" Kalis did not answer, because grief does not answer. Grief only waits. The warp shifted. The viewing screens flickered. The star map realigned. Kasaveka came into view. A world of pale stone and black mountains, half shrouded in plume-like fog that moved as though stirred by the breaths of ghosts. Fortress bastions stretched across its surface, not abandoned, not ruined, sleeping, waiting. Aurelia's voice came through the vox, steady as scripture. "All hands, prepare for descent." Kalis breathed once, slow, steady. Cadia had fallen, but its shadow had not, and now they were returning to stand among the ruins of their own afterlife. Not as ghosts, but as heirs. The war for identity had begun, and Kasaveka would decide what rose from the ashes of Cadia's memory. Kasaveka filled the viewport like a memory-given form. Pale stone ramparts traced the contours of jagged mountains, their silhouettes rising and falling like teeth in some ancient titan's jaw. Black storms coiled across the upper atmosphere, but not with the violent, writhing corruption of warp tempest. This was something slower, older, something that had waited so long that patience had hardened into identity. The planet did not feel abandoned. It felt asleep. The unbroken oath broke through the upper cloud layer, engines humming low, its descent measured and cautious. The warp had released it too easily, as though guiding rather than resisting. Kalis stood on the command bridge, eyes fixed ahead, posture carved from the same stone that had shaped the fortress worlds of Cadia. Aurelia stood slightly behind him, helmet held beneath her arm, gaze locked on the surface, as though she were staring into the face of an ancestor. Tovan was present as well, though he kept to the far side of the bridge, arms crossed, his expression drawn tight with the strain of loyalty pulled in two directions. He had not spoken since their last conversation. Silence clung to him like shadow. The ship touched down on a landing plateau carved into the side of a sheer cliff wall. The stone was weathered but unbroken, bearing the marks of a civilization that had known siege and had not bent. The gates ahead rose 5 stories high, engraved not with imperial sigils, but with symbols older, fortress geometry, star patterns, the angular runes of defensive architectures that predated the adoption of the Aquila. No one spoke until the landing ramp descended, and the first steps of Cadian boots struck the stone of Kasaveka. The sound echoed, not hollow, not empty, but resonant, as though the ground recognized them. The air here was cold, sharp, carrying the faint scent of minerals and the distant metallic tang of old war. Wind brushed across armor and banners, but no dust rose. The ground was too still for that. The regiment formed into ranks, almost instinctively. No orders had been given. They simply aligned, as if the very act of stepping onto this world reconnected muscle memory to something deeper than drilled habit. Aurelia stepped forward and placed her palm against the stone of the great gate. The wind shifted, the silence thickened, and then with a groaning resonance that felt less mechanical and more like breath. The gates began to open inward, not pushed, not pulled, responding. The passage within was a long hall of carved stone, illuminated by flickering braziers that should not have been able to burn. There was no fuel, no spark, yet flame crackled with cold, colourless light. The architecture was unmistakably Cadian in structure, but Cadian architecture as remembered through dream, untouched by siege or decay. Hallways precise in angle and proportion, the kind of defensive layout that taught every footstep to mean something. Kalis led the regiment inside. Their footsteps echoed off the massive stone interior, the air filled with the reverberation of presence returning. Aurelia walked at his shoulder, her expression unreadable, jaw set with something like reverence. Tovan followed behind, his eyes searching for threat, logic trying to find footing where logic dissolved. They entered a central chamber vast enough to house a battalion. The ceiling rose into a vaulted arch, chiseled with reliefs depicting fortress worlds under storm-swept skies. But it was the centerpiece of the room that stopped every Cadian in their tracks. A statue, not of a general, not of a saint, a soldier, armor unadorned, weapons standard issue, expression stern, not triumphant, no name etched into the pedestal, no lineage, no rank. Cadian. Every soldier recognized themselves in the stone. Aurelia's breath broke softly. They built this before Cadia fell, before any of us were born. Kalis approached the statue, stopping just before the base. The pedestal bore only one engraving, simple, sharp, carved with purposeful restraint. We stand. The words resonated through him like a voice from his own bones. He turned to the regiment. This place was not meant to be found by the Imperium. It was meant to be found by us. A murmur moved through the soldiers, not spoken words, but the shift of something internal aligning. Aurelia stepped forward. Casa Vekar was not sanctuary. It was preparation. A fortress waiting for the day Cadia would fall. A place where those who survived would remember who they are. Kalis felt the truth of her words settle in the marrow. This is not where we hide, she continued. This is where we rebuild what cannot be erased. Tovan moved then, not toward Kalis or Aurelia, but toward the statue. His hand trembled as he traced the carved letters. "We stand," he whispered. His voice did not break, but something in him did. He turned, and when he faced Kalis again, the fracture within him had shifted. It had not healed, but it had found direction. "Marshal," he said, voice steadier than it had been in days. "If this is to be our path, then we must follow it with clarity. No myth, no blind faith, only purpose." Kalis nodded. "Purpose is all we have ever had." The regiment began to explore the fortress, splitting into quiet units. The halls stretched deep and wide, armories stocked with weapons sealed in dustless vaults, barracks fully intact, training grounds carved into the mountainside. None of it made sense in ordinary terms. No supplies decayed, no metal rusted, no dust collected. Casa Vekar had waited for them. As the regiment spread through the fortress, Carlos and Aurelia walked the central walkway leading to the outer parapets. The wind here was sharper, carrying the distant roar of mountain storms. The valley below stretched in sweeping expanse, icy, dark, and vast as a tomb. Aurelia closed her eyes and let the wind move across her face. "Do you feel it? Not just the memory, the presence. The world knows us." Kailas rested his hands on the stone balustrade. Casa Vekar was meant to shape us, not to change what we are, but to reveal it. Aurelia opened her eyes. "The Imperium will come. They will, Kalis agreed, and they will not understand. No, he said quietly. They will fear. For a long moment they stood in silence. Below them the regiment moved like a single organism, every step aligned in purpose. No chants, no declarations, only the quiet, unstoppable certainty of identity reawakening. Tovan stepped onto the parapet behind them. His expression was stern, resolved. Marshal, Lieutenant, the men are asking one question. Kalis turned. What question? Tovan answered simply, what happens now? The wind howled through the fortress walls, carrying with it the echo of a world that had died screaming. Kalis looked out across the valley, across the ghost of Cadia that now lived not in stone, but in flesh. We make Casa Veka ready, he said. We rebuild what was lost, and when the Imperium comes for us. He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. The regiment already knew. The work began before dawn, though time felt indistinct on Casa Veka. The sky shifted in shades of grey-blue that never quite brightened nor darkened, as though the sun itself hesitated to claim dominion here. The Cadians moved through the fortress like they had always belonged within its walls. They repaired battlements, reactivated dormant power conduits, cleared dustless corridors that had waited centuries for footsteps to return. Every motion carried intention. Every breath felt as though it had weight. There was no confusion, no hesitation. Only the quiet certainty of soldiers who were not learning their surroundings, but remembering them. Yet Kalis felt the wrongness beneath that ease. Memory was not supposed to come this easily to a place no one had ever seen. He moved through the central hall, his gloved fingers tracing stone that felt too warm, as though it retained the touch of long-departed hands. Aurelia walked beside him, silent, her gaze forward, sharp. The statue of the nameless soldier stood behind them, watching with stone eyes that seemed more aware than sculpture should be. Casa Veka remembers us, Aurelia said quietly, as though picking the thought directly from his mind. Kalis did not answer immediately. He could feel it too, the sense of recognition, as though every step they took echoed steps taken long before. But that made no sense. The fortress was ancient, predating the Imperium's earliest recorded designs. That architecture was unmistakable, and yet its doctrine, its geometry, its tactical flow, these were Cadian. Someone knew Cadia would fall, Kalis said at last. Aurelia nodded, or something. The distinction mattered, but he did not press it. Tovan entered from a side corridor, his armor smeared with the pale dust of stone. His posture was upright, his expression controlled, but something in his stance had settled. Conflict remained, but no longer directionless. The perimeter fortifications are sound, he reported. Batteries function, power grid stable. Whoever built this place wanted it to endure. Kalis studied him. And does it feel like endurance to you? Tovan hesitated, jaw tightening. It feels like waiting. Aurelia gave the faintest nod. Then we have arrived not at sanctuary, but at the edge of unfinished purpose. They walked deeper into the fortress, toward its heart, an atrium sealed by 3 concentric gates of blackened stone. When they approached, the gates did not open as the entrance had. They remained still, unmoving, vast and unyielding. The message was clear. Some doors required worth, not trespass. Aurelia stepped toward them, placing her palm against the stone. The surface responded with a faint pulse of pale green light, the same color as the veins that ran through the black stone fragment on Helios Reach. A low hum resonated through the air, subtle but undeniable. The fortress recognized her, but the gates did not open. Aurelia stepped back. "Something sleeps behind these doors," she murmured. Tovan's voice was low. "Or something remembers." Kalis exhaled. "Then we do not force the doors. We are not invaders here." He turned away and stopped. The air felt heavier, as though the fortress itself had drawn in breath. Then the whisper came. Not through vox, not through sound, through memory. "Casa Veca does not open to command. Casa Veca opens to sacrifice." Aurelia stiffened. "You heard it too." Kalis did not answer. He did not need to. Tovan drew in a slow, unsteady breath. "Something in this place is aware." "No," Aurelia corrected softly. "Something in this place is alive." Before they could speak further, one of the forward scouts approached, saluting with crisp precision. "Marshal, Lieutenant, movement detected, beyond the outer ranges." The words hit like trigger pull. The Imperium had come sooner than expected, but Kalis saw it in the scout's eyes. This was not Relief Fleet signal code, not Imperial. "Identify," Kalis said. The scout swallowed. "Transponder unknown. No official codes, no hails, but ship profiles match." He hesitated. Aurelia stepped forward. "Match what?" The scout's voice thinned. "Heretic Astartes." Silence filled the hall like a drowning tide. Tovan spoke first, voice low. "They followed the Blackstone resonance, just as we did." Aurelia's gaze sharpened to a blade. "They believe Cadia's fall belongs to them, that they broke us, that they own our memory." Kalis looked to the battlements. The sky outside darkened as ships pierced the atmosphere, contrails of fire streaking across the cloud banks. They descended like vultures drawn to fresh carrion. "We defend," Kalis said. No hesitation, no debate. Aurelia nodded. "Casa Veca wakes to war." The regiment mobilized instantly. Heavy weapon teams took positions along ramparts. Armor divisions rolled into defensive arcs. Infantry spread across choke points and firing galleries, their movements synchronized without command. The fortress itself seemed to guide them. Angles perfect, sight lines optimal, kill zones already drawn into the architecture. It was not simply a fortress. It was a weapon. The first of the enemy broke through the clouds. Traitor Marines bearing the colors of the Black Legion descended in drop pods that screamed like falling meteors. The ground shook as the first pod smashed into the valley below, their doors slamming open with explosive force. Warriors of the Long War emerged, massive, armored in black and gold, moving with the confidence of those who believed themselves masters of the battlefield. They expected to find exiles. What they found were Cadians. The first volley came from the ramparts. Las fire in tight, disciplined bursts, heavy bolter emplacements roaring with controlled fury. The traitor Marines advanced through the storm of fire, but the Cadians did not retreat. They did not break formation. They fired with the precision of memory and the certainty of identity. Kalis watched from the upper wall. The Black Legion moved like wolves, but wolves bled. And Cadians had hunted beasts for 10,000 years. Traitor champions roared praises to dark gods. Cadians answered with silence. Their war cry was the absence of surrender. Aurelia moved along the battlements, blade drawn, voice carrying just loud enough to reach those nearest her. "Remember, Cadia." The regiment did not shout. They stood. The battle surged through the valley, fire and steel clashing beneath storm-shadowed skies. The enemy pushed but could not break the line. Something had settled into the Cadians. Not invincibility, not divine blessing, acceptance. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to endure. And endurance is death's oldest enemy. Tovan fought near the lower gate, his strikes efficient, clean, controlled. When a Black Legionnaire struck him across the chest, the impact cracked armor, but Tovan rose. He did not look surprised, only resolved. Aurelia descended the battlements to join him, her blade cutting a line of iron flame. "You stand," she said. Tovan met her eyes, breath harsh. "I stand." No argument, no conflict, only alignment. Kalis watched from the parapet, issuing no commands, because none were needed. The regiment acted as one body. They always had. They always would. But as the enemy pressed, something else stirred. The great sealed doors behind them glowed faintly, not opening, waking. The fortress was remembering itself. As the echoes of battle shook the stone underfoot, Kalis spoke, not to Aurelia, not to Tovan, not to the soldiers, to the fortress. "We are here. We have returned. Cadia stands." The light in the stone flared. The gates trembled, and the fortress answered. The fortress shook as the traitor Marines pressed their assault, the clash of bolter fire and the roar of laser guns turning the valley into a crucible of smoke and death. Yet the Cadians did not bend. They moved with a grim rhythm, their formation shifting with practiced precision as the enemy surged and recoiled. The Black Legion had expected to face broken survivors clinging to the memory of a shattered world. Instead, they faced soldiers who fought as though their souls had been hammered into iron. Kalis stood atop the parapet, watching the lines hold, his posture as still and unyielding as the stone beneath his boots. He had expected fear to rise within him. He had expected uncertainty. But what he felt instead was a strange, profound clarity. Every moment since Cadia fell had led to this one. Every bitter breath, every step taken through ash and void, every wound endured, brought them here to a fortress that remembered them even when they had forgotten themselves. Below, Aurelia moved like a flame through the melee, her presence unmistakable. She was not merely leading, she was embodying. The soldiers around her fought harder when she passed. They stood straighter. They aimed without hesitation. She had become the living shape of Cadia's eternal refusal to break. Tovan fought at the gate, his blade catching the dull light of the storming sky. The earlier doubt that had clouded his expression was gone. He moved now with a silent, unadorned resolve, neither reverent nor zealous, simply certain. But certainty alone could not end this battle. The Black Legion was relentless. Their armor bore the marks of 1,000 campaigns, their bodies fueled by war and hatred that had endured for 10 millennia. They advanced not as soldiers, but as inevitability. Their war was not for conquest. It was for erasure. Kalis descended the parapet and joined Aurelia at the front lines, just as a Black Legion champion crashed through the Cadian formation. The traitor was immense, his armor etched with blasphemous runes, his helm crowned with horns like the twisted mockery of a lord. His chain blade screamed as it carved through the air, sparks flying as it clashed against bayonets and steel. Aurelia moved to intercept, her blade rising in a swift arc. The champion met her strike with brutal force, knocking her back a step. She did not fall. She did not yield. Kalis joined her, drawing his power blade with a sound like memory being refined to a point. Together, they fought the champion, Aurelia swift and cutting, Kalis grounded and unbreakable. The traitor's blows fell heavy enough to crack stone, but the Cadians moved around him like currents around rock, striking not to overpower, but to wear down, to erode, to endure. When the killing strike came, it was not dramatic, it was quiet. Aurelia slipped beneath the champion's guard, her blade thrusting upward into the soft joint of his helm. Kalis followed with a downward cut that severed helm from shoulders. The giant fell, the sound of his collapse echoing across the stone, as though marking a turning point in the air itself. The Cadians did not cheer. They pressed forward. But as the battle raged, the fortress began to awaken. The great sealed gates behind them pulsed with cold light, the runes across their surface flaring to life like embers catching flame. The hum that resonated through the stone deepened, becoming a vibration felt in muscle and bone. The ground trembled, not from impact, but from rising awareness. Aurelia felt it like breath along her spine. It responds to us. Tovan stepped back, eyes widening as the gates trembled. No, it responds to something within us. The enemy felt it too. The Black Legion's advance faltered, their formation wavering as though something unseen pressed against them. Some turned to flee. Others roared defiantly, trying to drown out the shifting reality around them. The gates began to open. No force touched them. No hands pulled them. They parted like curtains drawn back by time itself. Pale light spilled out, cold and soft, illuminating a chamber that stretched deep into the mountain's heart. The air that flowed from within was neither warm nor cold. It carried no scent, yet it carried weight. Kalis took a step forward, and the regiment followed without command. Inside the chamber, massive stone pillars rose into darkness, carved with the same simple phrase repeated again and again, in languages old and forgotten, in sigils that predated the Imperium, in the glyph script of fortress builders who had shaped worlds into shields. We stand, we stand, we stand. In the center of the chamber rested a sarcophagus, crafted not for the dead, but for the eternal. No decoration adorned its surface, no laurels, no name, only the same 4 words. Aurelia's voice was barely a whisper. This is not a tomb. Kalis felt it too. The sarcophagus was not sealed to contain something, but to remember something. Tovan's breath shook once. What sleeps here? Before Kalis could speak, the whisper returned, not from outside, not from the warp, but from within every Cadian present. Not a voice, a truth. Cadia does not fall. A blast shook the fortress. The Black Legion was pushing again. Desperation now where arrogance had been. The gates to the valley trembled under the assault. The enemy was preparing to break through by sheer force. Aurelia turned to Kalis. If we do not finish this now, we are crushed. Kalis looked at the sarcophagus. Everything since Cadia's fall had led them here. Every breath, every battle, every refusal to die. He stepped forward. The moment his hand touched the stone, the fortress breathed in. The chamber blazed with pale fire. Memory surged, not his own. He saw Cadia before it ever knew ruin. He saw its architects building fortresses not for a war that existed, but for one that was promised. He saw soldiers training not for life but for legacy. He saw the first oath spoken, not in ceremony, but in necessity. Cadia was never built to survive. Cadia was built to return. Kalis drew back his hand. The sarcophagus did not open further. It did not need to, because the thing inside was not meant to awaken. It was meant to wake them. He turned to his regiment. We do not retreat, he said quietly. They already knew. We do not falter. Their breathing was steady. We do not die. Aurelia stepped beside him. We stand. The words rolled through the chamber, through the fortress, through the valley. The Cadians marched back into the storm, not as survivors, but as the last light of a world that refused to be extinguished. The Black Legion saw them return, and for the first time since Cadia fell, chaos remembered how to fear. The Cadians surged back into the fray with a momentum that did not belong to the living alone. Their boots struck the stone like a heartbeat, synchronized and relentless. The Black Legion recoiled, not from the force of their fire, but from the weight of their presence. These soldiers did not fight with desperation or fury. They fought with inevitability. They fought as though every moment had already happened before, and they were simply moving along the line they had always been meant to follow. Kailas led them from the front, blade drawn, the memory of the sarcophagus burning through him like a second pulse. He did not feel stronger. He felt remembered. Aurelia stood at his side, armor stained with blood and ash. Her expression sharpened into something that looked almost divine in its certainty. Every step she took seemed to drag the world into alignment behind her. Reality settling into a shape that could not break. Tovan moved behind them, a pillar of steel discipline. His doubts burned away in the crucible of the fortress. The fracture in him had not vanished, but it had become foundation, not fault. His voice cut through the din of battle in measured commands, guiding squads through crossfire and counter-advance with precision that made even traitor marines falter. Lasfire slashed through the haze. Heavy bolters thundered. The ground shook with the impact of armored boots and ceramite plate. The Black Legion howled their oaths to gods that devoured meaning. The Cadians answered in silence that made their enemy feel small. But inevitability is never gentle. The enemy adapted. Their lines thickened. More drop pods screamed down from the sky, streaks of fire carving into the valley floor. The roar of corrupted engines tore the air. Warped dreadnoughts crashed across the battlefield, their metal forms howling with voices that should not have belonged to machines. Kasaveka held, but the assault intensified, not breaking the line, but pressing it toward collapse by weight alone. Aurelia cut down a charging traitor with a clean, brutal strike, then turned to Kailas, her voice calm even under the storm. "We cannot hold them here forever." Kailas parried a blow, drove his blade into the exposed joint of another marine, pulled free. "So we do not hold. We break them." Aurelia's eyes caught his, and something passed between them in the space of a breath. It was not a plan. It was understanding, the kind that only existed between those who had survived death together. But Tovan saw something in Aurelia that Kailas did not, or refused to acknowledge. She had begun to move differently, not simply with confidence, with inevitability. Her blade did not strike to defend. It struck to conclude, as if she had already accepted the cost. A roar echoed across the battlefield. A traitor champion far larger than the one before, clad in armor etched with the eye of Horus, wielding a chain axe that dripped black ichor and sparks of warp lightning. His voice rolled across the battlefield like thunder. "Cadians, you are already dead. Let the dead kneel." No soldier answered. Aurelia stepped forward, and the battlefield changed. Cadians around her went still, not in hesitation, but in reverence. They knew what was about to happen. Kailas knew too, but denial rose in him like a bruise behind his ribs. "Aurelia," he said quietly, "not like this." She turned, her expression soft, in a way he had not seen since before Cadia fell. It was always going to be like this. He reached for her arm, not as commander, but as someone who could not bear to lose the last anchor of the world he had lost. She touched his hand once, firmly. "Kailas, we did not survive Cadia to pretend we are mortal. One of us must prove what Cadia means. One of us must become the oath." Tovan heard. His breath froze. "There are other ways." Aurelia smiled, but there was grief in her eyes. "There never were." She stepped forward. The champion roared, raising his chain axe. Aurelia did not draw back. She moved with the calm of someone stepping into familiar ground. Her blade rose, not in grand flourish, but in the direct functional arc of a soldier trained since childhood. The clash shook the stone under their feet. Sparks flew. The chain teeth screamed and bit and spat fire. The champion fought with brute fury. Aurelia fought with memory. Every strike was the echo of Cadia's walls. Every parry was the breath of chasms that no longer existed. Every step was the weight of the dead she carried. But the champion was massive, inexhaustible, driven by dark gods that fed him strength beyond mortal measure. Their blades locked, and the force of it threw both of them back. Aurelia hit the ground hard and rose in one fluid motion. But Kaelus saw the hitch in her breath. A fracture, small, but real. The champion saw it too. He lunged. Aurelia moved, but not fast enough. The chain axe tore through her armor, shattering ceramite, rending through flesh and bone. Blood struck the air in a fine arc of dark red. Kaelus's voice tore from him, raw and wordless. Aurelia did not fall. She stepped closer and drove her blade into the champion's throat, burying it to the hilt, twisting once, clean, final. The traitor collapsed, armor striking stone with the impact of a fallen monument. Only then did Aurelia fall. Kaelus caught her before she hit the ground. Her blood soaked into his armor, hot even in the cold air. Her breath was faint but steady. Her gaze did not cloud. Tovan knelt beside them, hands shaking. "We can stabilize her. We can—" "No," Aurelia whispered, voice barely breath. "This is the moment Cadia lives again." Kaelus held her, unable to speak. Her hand lifted, gripping his armor weakly, not pleading, anchoring. "Lead them, Kaelus. Not as the Imperium commands, as Cadia remembers." Her hand slipped. Her breath left her. But the light in her eyes did not fade in fear. It faded in certainty. The battlefield fell still. No one shouted. No one wept. Cadians do not break in the moment they lose. They break afterward. Kaelus stood slowly, Aurelia's body in his arms, the weight of her both unbearable and sacred. He laid her down with care that felt like ritual and closed her eyes with his hand. He rose. The regiment watched him. Black Legion forces paused, not out of respect, but out of recognition of a shift they could not name. Kaelus's voice, when it came, was quiet, but it did not need volume. "Cadia stands." The phrase moved through the regiment like flame through dry air, not shouted, spoken, a vow. Cadians advanced, not because they believed they would survive, but because Aurelia had proven what survival meant. The fortress shook again, but now it was awake, fully. The sarcophagus in the heart of Kasaveka pulsed once, not with life, but with purpose. Kaelus walked forward into the storm. The last march had begun. The storm over Kasaveka had changed. What had once been a cold, silent shroud now churned with movement, spiraling above the battlements as though pulled into the gravity of something vast awakening beneath the stone. The fortress hummed with deep resonance, like a heartbeat amplified through the mountain's bones. Every corridor, every parapet, every vaulted hall thrummed with that same steady pulse, as though the world itself breathed in time with the Cadians who stood upon it. Aurelia's body lay where Kaelus had placed her, at the foot of the great statue of the nameless soldier. There was no ceremony yet. Cadians did not grieve in motion. Grief would come only when the line no longer needed holding. For now, her presence was not absence, it was anchor. Her final act had not ended the battle. It had defined it. Kaelus stood at the front lines again, his armor streaked with blood and ash, his blade gripped in a hand that did not tremble. The wound inside him was not emotional, it was structural. Something within him had rearranged in the moment Aurelia fell. The part of him that had once held doubt had been replaced by a stillness that felt ancient. She had believed he would lead, so he did. The Black Legion continued their assault, but something had changed in them as well. They no longer advanced with the confidence of executioners. They advanced with the desperation of invaders who realized the ground beneath them was older, stronger, less willing to be taken. They had expected to face a broken remnant. Instead, they faced a world remembering itself. The Cadians did not chant. They did not roar. They simply advanced, every step precise, every volley measured, every motion a continuation of a history they did not choose but accepted fully. The fortress responded. Doors sealing behind formations, elevation platforms rising to reinforce firing lines, energy fields flickering to life where no generators were visible. The architecture itself was joining the defense. But the Black Legion did not break easily. More drop pods streaked through the clouds, and with them came something larger, an armored giant bearing the mark of Abaddon's chosen. A Terminator in black and brass, bearing a hammer large enough to shatter ceramite like bone. He landed hard enough to crack the stone, rising with the slow, inevitable posture of one who had never known defeat. His gaze swept across the battlefield and found Kalis. He raised his hammer and pointed it toward him, as though marking the kill before the strike. Tovan stepped forward before Kalis could respond. "I will take him." Kalis turned, not in refusal, but in recognition. Tovan had been struggling since the Blackstone first stirred. He had been walking the line between identity and fracture. Now that line was straight. "This is not for glory," Kalis said quietly. Tovan nodded once. "I know." And he went. The Terminator advanced, each footstep sending tremors through the stone. Tovan met him head-on, laser gun fire glancing uselessly from the traitor's armor. He drew blade and combat knife, moving with a precision that came not from talent, but from discipline etched into bone. The first clash shook the air. Tovan struck at joints, at weak points, at memory-engraved vulnerabilities. But the Terminator fought with brutal inevitability. His hammer swung in arcs that could crush tanks. Tovan dodged one, two, then the third caught him across the chest. The force lifted him from the ground and threw him against a battlement, stone splintering under the impact. But he rose. Blood dripped from his mouth. His grip shook. His armor was cracked open along the ribs. He rose anyway. The Terminator advanced again, hammer raised. Tovan spoke, but not to the enemy. "Cardia stands." The traitor swung downward to crush him. Tovan stepped forward into the strike, not away, into. The hammer struck him full force. Bone shattered, armor ruptured, flesh broke. And in that final instant, when everything that had made him mortal failed, Tovan drove his knife upward into the Terminator's throat joint, forcing it by sheer momentum of his own collapsing body weight. The Terminator staggered. Tovan did not see him fall. His body hit the stone motionless. Kalis bowed his head for a single breath. Tovan had not surrendered in doubt. He had chosen. That was enough. The fortress gates behind them shuddered, not as they had before, but fully, as though something beyond them responded directly to sacrifice. The runes flared in pale white fire. The sarcophagus at the mountain's heart pulsed again, slower now, deeper, not opening, calling. The Black Legion began to falter, not from defeat, from recognition. Chaos thrives on broken wills. The Cadians' wills were not merely unbroken, they were unbreakable. That terrified them. A massive crash shook the valley. A demon engine tore through the sky, wings of metal and warp flame beating against the storm. It shrieked. a sound like metal screaming under pressure, and dove for the battlements. Kalis moved, but he knew he would not reach its landing point in time. But the fortress responded first. A spear of pale light erupted from the central courtyard, striking the demon engine mid-flight and tearing it apart in a flare of shimmering energy. The pieces fell flaming to the valley floor. The fortress did not defend the Cadians. The fortress defended itself. Kalis understood then. Casa Vekar was not a refuge. It was a continuation. Aurelia had not died to preserve a memory. She had died to reveal its nature. This world was not where Cadia was rebuilt. It was where Cadia returned. But there was still one final truth left to face. The enemy did not break and flee. They regrouped. They formed ranks. They raised banners. They prepared to charge a final time, not as conquerors, but as those who refused to accept that something could stand against them without worshipping a god. Kalis stepped forward, alone, onto the central causeway. The storm parted above him. The wind fell silent. Every Cadian lifted their head. Every traitor paused. His voice carried, without amplification, without command, without force, only truth. We are not here because we lived. We are here because we refused to die when the galaxy demanded our ending. The wind shifted, cold and sharp. Cadia fell, and we did not. The ground trembled. You call us dead. You call us broken. You call us ghosts. He raised his blade. We are not ghosts. The fortress pulsed. We are memory. The soldiers behind him stepped forward. We are Cadia. The Black Legion charged, and the Cadians met them, not to survive, not to win, but to end the question of whether Cadia still stood. Steel struck steel, fire met fire. Flesh and armor and purpose collided in a storm that devoured the valley floor. But Kalis felt no weight, no exhaustion, no fear. Aurelia's certainty had passed into him. Tovan's acceptance had become his. The fortress's memory had become his. He had become not symbol, not leader, not martyr, continuation. The battle roared around him like the echo of a world dying and being born at once. He spoke one final time, not aloud, not to the regiment, to Cadia. We stand, the fortress answered. The stone under his feet glowed. The sarcophagus pulsed one last time, radiant, final, eternal. And in that moment, every Cadian knew. Not one of them would leave this world alive, but none of them had ever been alive to leave. The last stand of Casa Vekar had begun.